ventral aorta and afferent branchial arteries coming off the ventral aorta, supplying deoxygenated blood to the gills. Then what we have to look for is the efferent branchial arteries carrying the oxygenated blood away from the gills. And lo and behold, with any luck, we're going to see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 efferent branchial arteries coming off. Here for you guys, 1, 2, 3, 4 efferent branchial arteries carrying the blood away from the gills. Yep, okay. And those efferent branchial arteries come together to form a large midline vessel, and that big vessel would be the dorsal aorta. Okay, so that's going to carry the blood back towards the body and also forward towards the head. And as it comes forward, that single midline dorsal aorta splits into the paired dorsal aorta. And this shark did not inject super well so that you can see them all the way forward. So you can see this pair of vessels here, and then you kind of lose them. Okay. You see those here? These are the paired dorsal aorta. And then they kind of get lost. But we do have another shark here, which I had looked at, and I believe we can see. Oh, so I thought this one actually was. Oh, yeah, you can barely see it here. But here's the paired dorsal aorta coming around, and you can see that it curves laterally there and connects to this vessel, which is the hyoidian efferent. So here's the dorsal aorta curving around to the side. You see that okay? Right. You guys, here it goes, and it kind of curves over like that to the side, connects to the hyoidian efferent. Okay. So I'll come back to this one. Where that would be on this one here would be coming and curving around and connecting approximately there to the hyoidian efferent. So this vessel that we see coming up like this is the hyoidian efferent artery, or efferent hyoidian, I guess is properly what it's called. And where the paired dorsal aorta and the hyoidian efferent join, that vessel then that runs forward from there is the internal carotid artery. So this is the internal carotid here running forward. And you've got one from each side coming together. They come right together in the midline and then pop into that hole in the bottom of the chondrocranium. And that, what was that hole called?
Carotid foramen.
The carotid foramen. Okay, so just to remind you, we've seen where that is. Okay, so I haven't even been paying attention to my list here. Let me look at it, make sure I'm good. Order. I'm doing pretty well. One thing that we haven't seen, which I don't believe these guys really dissected, are the collector loops, which are the blood supply coming out of the gills and going into the efferent branchial arteries. And they're a little tricky to dissect, but if anyone wants to get in there and try, particularly if you have a bigger shark, it can be a little bit easier. But that's basically this loop that surrounds each gill slit and is draining the blood out of the gill lamellae into the efferent branchial artery. Okay. All right, there's some other little branches to mention. There's some arteries that branch off from let's see if I can find them here. There we go. From the region here of the second efferent branchial artery, and you can see them running along like there. You see that little guy? And this is called the pharyngoesophageal artery, and it runs to the pharynx and the esophagus, hence pharyngoesophageal. And you should be able to follow them down that way, but they often don't inject very well further down, and you just see the beginning of them. The hyoidian efferents we've seen. Okay, if we look up in this region here off the internal carotid, what you can see is there's a branch. You can see there was a branch. Where did it go? There should be two branches. Oh, there's the other one. Okay, good. There's a branch here that runs forward like this, and this is called the stapedial artery. and it's carrying blood forward up into the head. And does anyone know what the stapes what's the stapes?
In the ear?
It's in the middle ear of a mammal, right? It's, and this artery is homologous with an artery called the stapedial artery in mammals that runs right through a hole in the middle of the stapes. So it's running forward into the skull, basically off of the aortic arches.
Do amphibians have stapes?
They do. It's called a columella usually in an amphibian, but yeah, they do. Okay, so that's the stapedial artery, and then there's another artery that you'll see running forward, or actually really coming out this way here, and this is the efferent spirocular artery. So it's carrying blood away from the pseudobranch that sits in the spiracle. That's this one here. And remember, the pseudobranch has is not actually oxygenating the blood, and so it gets blood from an afferent spirocular artery, which I don't think we can see on here. Did you guys find that, the afferent spirocular?
It was I think we kind of tore it.
It's usually, you can see it on the outside of the head, sort of by the spiracle, but.
It was next to the hyoidian nerve.
Wait, on the inside or branches? And there's a branch that comes off the dorsal aorta and runs over to the pectoral fin. You can see that right there. And that is the subclavian artery. Okay. And this is one that, again, we'll see in all jawed vertebrates. It basically supplies blood to the pectoral fin or pectoral limb. Okay. It's called subclavian because in mammals it runs right under the clavicle, and then it goes over to the limb. Okay. So that's the subclavian artery. Anterior ventrolateral artery. Hey. Okay. I don't know why I put that one on the list because it's not really.
I think you can see it on either chart. Right about here, is that it? There's a faint line right there.
Is that red?
Yeah, that is red.
Right there. Okay. So that would be anterior ventrolateral artery. There's a anterior, it's anterior, and it is ventrolateral, and it's in the body wall, so cool. I'm not too worried about that one for what it's worth. But then the next four are really important. These are the four median arteries that run down to the gut off the dorsal aorta. And the first one of these you'll find starting very far forward and running very independently. Doesn't really run through a mesentery, it just kind of runs in space here. And that is the celiac artery. And that kind of dives in and eventually connects up to this region of the lesser omentum. And it has some branches off of it. Remember there was a pancreatico-mesenteric vein that's draining from the region of the ventral lobe of the pancreas back into the hepatic portal vein. And pancreatico-mesenteric vein is running along right here. And there should be an artery running along with it. Is there anything red in there? Hopefully that's red.
Oh, it's right here next to his orange
Yeah,
one.
there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, right there. This is where you guys have the big advantage of being able to see red. Right there is the, oops, I'm sorry, did you see that in my hands?
Yeah.
Okay. The pancreatico-mesenteric artery. And if we follow that along and back, you're going to see that that pops out onto the surface of the intestine, and that's the anterior intestinal artery. Okay, so it runs along there.
That was all one branch?
That's all one branch off of the celiac artery. Okay. There's also a gastrohepatic artery that comes off of the celiac, and that one gives rise to branches that run out to the stomach, which would be the gastric part, and a hepatic branch that runs through the lesser omentum here to the liver. If you see the red there. And that's supplying oxygenated blood to the liver, because the liver needs to get oxygenated blood as well as the nutrient-rich blood coming back from the gut.
Could you point out that branching group?
So there's the hepatic part, there's the gastric part, and they're both coming from here, from the celiac artery, which is this one here that's popping into that region.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the celiac. Then there's the lenogastric. Oops, there's a pin in here. How nice. The lenogastric and anterior mesenteric arteries. And these two come off dorsal aorta very close to each other. The lenogastric you can distinguish because it's running to the region of the spleen. So that's the lenogastric there, and it supplies the spleen and the stomach as it passes through the spleen. And then this one here is the anterior mesenteric that runs to the gut and turns into the posterior intestinal artery as it runs along the gut. Posterior intestinal. Then, last but not least, is the posterior mesenteric artery, and that's the one that goes to the digitiform gland. So here's digitiform gland, and if I lift it up, do you see that artery going to it? That is the posterior mesenteric artery. Okay. Iliac arteries. Did you guys make that cut? Let's see. You can see them better over on this side. Is that really red? That looks blue to me.
It's
It's
red,
red.
but
It's
yeah, it just
It
has
is?
blue
Yeah.
over
It
it.
just has some blue over it. Oh, good. Okay, because that should be the iliac artery right
Yeah.
there. So this is a branch that comes off that runs to the pelvic fins, like we have the subclavian going to the pectoral fins. This is the iliac artery running to the pelvic fin, supplying blood to the pelvic fin. Okay. That's named for the ilium, which is the hip bone in a mammal. Okay. Oh, and femoral arteries and posterior ventrolateral arteries. So I was a little overly ambitious in giving you. The femoral artery is just the name for that iliac artery. When it enters into the pelvic fin, it's called femoral at that point. The posterior ventrolateral artery, again, is going to be in the ventrolateral body wall posteriorly. And can I see it? If I could see red. Is that red at all in there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, okay, well, good, because that's where it should be, but I'm just always not sure of red. That would be the posterior ventrolateral artery. And again, that's not a major one for us, just so you don't want to stress on it. Intersegmental arteries and veins, I'm not going to try to show you, but those are the ones that come off the dorsal aorta. Every myometer gets its own little branch off the dorsal aorta going to that segment. So they're really important, but they're often hard to dissect down to and see very clearly. I don't know, did you guys poke around for them at all?
No.
Not really, okay.
Going to the myomeres, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, I don't.
Renal arteries, likewise, are coming off the dorsal aorta, supplying the kidneys. And again, they're hard to dissect, but it's just good to know that they're there. And that's pretty much it for the circulatory. We have some stuff on the internal structure of the heart, and you're welcome to cut your heart open